quotient, or EQ, has gained wide acceptance. Now, the way that the theory goes is that your IQ engages your intelligence level. We'll talk about that a little bit as far as your logical reasoning, right? That is a form of intelligence. But they in the 1990s, what they began to study was how both men and women took intelligence tests or IQ tests to gauge their intelligent quotient. And what they found out is that overall, men seem to generally outscore women when it comes to logical testing scores that are gauged by IQs. But the thing was that as they began to look at the testing scores, if you actually look into the lives of both men and women, the same age, their peers, the same education level, those that they made the same money, as they began to compare both men and women equally, and they noticed that men outscore women more so on the IQ test, but reflective in their lives, the women lived more quality lives than the men that outscored them in the intelligence test, on the IQ test, right? And they were baffled by this because they couldn't understand why, if men seemed to be more logical and had higher IQ scores, why did it translate into their everyday living or their everyday lives? Well, in the 1990s, they began to do a little bit more studying, and they realized that the IQ tests that were being submitted to both men and women, one of the key factors was that these tests were only being written by men and from a male perspective. And so what they began to test a little bit further, and what it showed is that women and men think differently, right? As if no one in the universe had ever noticed that. But they began to understand that if they developed tests that included where women also had, where their strengths were in making these same intellectual decisions or decisions in their personal lives that showed that equal to more success in their lives than men, then they saw a drastic change. And what they found out is something that they termed, right, emotional intelligence. Not just how you logically add 2 + 2 = 4, but when you add 2 + 2 = 4, when is the proper time and not the improper time to apply it, so to speak, right? Or when is it always necessary to simply use 2 + 2 = 4? How many more ways can you get to 4, right? Can you do 1 + 3? Will that equal 4? Can you do 5 - 4? 3 + 1. Will that get you to 4? Right? 5 - 1. Will that get you to 4? Right? But based on how it fit in the scale of your everyday life. And so where men only simply view things as one way, logically speaking, problem, solution, answer, women would say problem. Why is there a problem? Discuss the details of the problem. How does that problem make them feel? And then adjust their emotions to it. and still come away with the same answer. And they found out that's a much better way of living a less stressful life and a much more life of fulfillment. Why? Because they did not just deal with the intellectual part of it, the logical part of it, but they also dealt with the emotional part of it. And so they began to develop these EQ tests, right? And so emotional intelligence is something that is needed not just in the lives of children as you raise your children and adults, but it's something that has not been promoted in our communities, especially in child rearing, right? What do we do when we see children, right? We have little boys, right? We raise little boys. And these little boys, they fall, they hurt themselves. What is it that they're usually told? Suck it up. Boys don't cry. Get up and deal with the pain. Keep playing. You'll be all right. It's okay. Don't cry. Boys don't cry. Right? What is that doing? You're really quenching or quashing the growth of emotional intelligence in that male child that he needs in order to really make sound decisions for his life. What do we do with young girls? Oftentimes, we allow them the ability to express their emotional quotient. So they're better problem solvers. They are. They have better social skills, right? They're able to be better listeners. They're able to develop, and this is one thing that those who are in tune or who have been taught to focus more on sort of their or focus more on their emotional quotient, one thing that they found out is that they become more intuitive or instinctive naturally, right? So when we talk about women's intuition, you're really talking about women's ability to recognize the emotions of a situation that would allow them to make a better decision logically. But we squash that in young boys and men growing up. And so even though we view things in a logical, sometimes called a more rational aspect, we're really missing out on taking charge or control of the full understanding of a situation because we lack the emotional quotient, right? We lack the emotional quotient. And oftentimes that leads to a more violent response to unfavorable situations. Why? Because we're not allowed to address our emotions as young boys and men coming up. We don't know how to express that. So it comes out, or we act it out violently, verbally, abusively, right? And this is what leads to what they like to term masculine toxicity, right? It's simply only a deficiency in your emotional quotient because we haven't been allowed as men overall to tap in and to learn how to cultivate that emotional quotient. And so what you have had over the years, although men may be more logical thinkers to a degree, and our intelligence quotients may be deemed a little higher. Now, women now have surpassed or completely matched men in the intelligence quotient area, along with their emotional quotient area that they've always been developed or attuned to or attested to in their lives, now we see and understand why women now can be so confident and say, I don't need a man. Or they can simply say, listen, I can do this now without you. Right? Because as a society as a whole, any lack of emotional intelligence simply breeds chaos. It simply breeds chaos. And so what we have to understand is that these things are oftentimes worded, turned into propaganda, have men fighting against women, women fighting against men, because we're not really understanding the differences. The differences. And the differences are social constructs. That's it. These things are social constructs. Now, when you're talking about in the scripture, it talks about the woman as the weaker vessel. It's not talking about intellectually, and it's not talking about emotionally. It's talking about physically made. Simply, women produce more estrogen, men produce more testosterone. The effects on that is simply what it is. It allows men to grow more muscle mass, right? Women grow estrogen, so they grow less muscle mass. They don't grow as tall oftentimes as men, right? It's just a physiological makeup, but it has nothing to do with the ability to make the right or wrong decision. It has nothing to do with whether or not a man can do what a woman can do and a woman can do what a man can do, right? Those are all ill-fated arguments that keep us divided and not being able to build as a community, right? And I'm specifically speaking to our people right now, Black folks, right? It hinders our ability to do what we've seen done in the past. If we were to take today's society and place them back 3,000-4,000 years, do you think the society in our community, the people, the children in our communities, the adults in our communities, with our lack of emotional intelligence, what we have today, do you think we've been able to build such great pyramid structures and great mathematics and develop great mathematics and different things of that nature? Art, sculpture, agriculture, culture. How have we been able to build as one, as a society and as a prosperous community with what we have today? I think it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do. And so, because we are often divided in this way, we begin to point the finger. Why? Why? Because we're feeling the pressures of what people have placed on us in the society. And usually it's not really the lay folks. The lay folks, us everyday folks, we're the folks that usually feels the pressure of that's what's being squeezed from the top down. But if we look for more ways in how to become more cohesive in our communities and with our families, and even more cohesive with yourself, right? Then we can see a better community. You can see better atmosphere and better discussions and communications with your significant other and in your household, with your children, with your family members. Even if you consider yourself, well, look, I just stay to myself. Well, get in the mirror, talk to yourself, right? The scripture talks about encouraging yourself. We have to encourage ourselves, right? And so These are the things that we have to really keep in mind, right? And keep focus of. Not all of this, what we see on social media, excuse me, and TikTok and YouTube and these various, folks beefing back and forth about nothing, right? It's not profitable. It's not profitable, right? I suggest you turn away from it because it only decreases your value and it only takes away from your listen. When you listen, as you begin to elevate your consciousness, right? You have to be very careful what you feed it. If all you feed it is gossip, right? That begins to bring down your elevation, and you'll find yourself back at those lower states of consciousness that you don't want to be at. You're doing things now in reverse because of what you're feeding your consciousness, right? You're now you're changing your collective. Now, once you're collective and one in mind and heart and spirit with those who are ascending, failing not to assemble yourselves together in unity, right? You're taking yourself away from that elevation. Now you're connecting yourself to another completely different collective, conscious collective of those who are decreasing in self-value, self-worth, self-help, spiritual awareness, self-awareness, self-correction, righteousness, right? By following the law, statutes, and commandments of the Most High, right? His ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts, right? That tells you right there. Some of y'all got some murderous thoughts going flying around in your head when somebody scuff up your shoe or they get too close to your car. Y'all have some murderous thoughts. They ain't fix your chicken right in the drive-thru. Y'all have some murderous thoughts. But the Most High says his ways are not our ways and his thoughts are not our thoughts, right? Those things come from the hearts and the minds of men, not the Most High. Not the Most High. So let's go a little bit further, right? Let's go a little bit further, right? Let's deal with that. Now, what I'm going to do is, for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to deal with the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence, right? This is some of the variations of what I talked about, what we mentioned earlier about the intrinsic basics of emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about 4 pillars. Some say there are 5. They add motivation to this list, but I see motivation within this. We'll deal with that. But the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence, and what you see here is that with each one of these sections, I'm going to give you the spiritual alchemy. I'm going to give you the spiritual alchemy. I'm going to give you the scriptural elixir, right? The scripture that you put together in order to obtain emotional intelligence, right? And we're going to show you why, and we're going to talk about why emotional intelligence has to first be preceded by spiritual intelligence. Let me say that again. Your emotional intelligence, and even in order to elevate your emotional intelligence, it first has to be preceded by your spiritual intelligence. Your spiritual intelligence, and that's another topic that we're going to get into, but it's clearly definitely intertwined with this lesson. But that's going to be our next lecture, is going to be on spiritual intelligence, right? Because spiritual intelligence must be set. You must be on a path of spiritual intelligence in order to understand and give a foundation and a basis for your emotional intelligence. And I'm going to show you where and why the circular world, psychologists and psychiatrists in the secular society that they go in, how they stray away from that, and they put this in reverse. And you see why we see many problems when they counseling folks, right? I'm not saying counseling is not good, but you have to be aware that your spiritual intelligence is just as important as your emotional intelligence. And we're going to talk about that just briefly, right? So here we see here, our first pillar here is self-awareness. And it says, recognize your own emotions. Understand how they influence your actions. That's just the breakdown of the first pillar of emotional intelligence. Now, I just read you earlier about the psychoanalyst that in the 1990s came up with this thing, what they call now emotional intelligence, or EQ, right? But I'm going to tell you and show you why the scripture is relevant today. I've had that debate before. People always still talk about, well, what can the Bible, what can I get out of that Bible? What can it do for me today? Well, I'm going to show you that the principles in the Bible that have always been written in the Bible by the law and the prophets is there and inspired by the Most High Yah, is there for rebuke, reproof, and learning, as the scripture says. And so when we read our first pillar, talk about self-awareness, this wasn't just discovered in the 1990s. Hold on one second, family. Hold on one second. This house about a year ago, and I said, "Well, I'll get you rented when we."
Well, that's the nice thing. If you're not pressured,
yeah,
time to get her done.
We're trying to get it.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping to just get it together. So hey, I was just telling my wife I got to get somebody that's not paint to help me paint that.
Don't get this hand.
But don't you know a painter?
I do. I have a painter who's actually a very good painter.
Okay, great. Yeah, I definitely need a painter.
We will send his number, and the nice thing is he gives free estimates, and you can go from there.
Oh, fantastic.
And then he does kitchens and bath and anything else inside the house.
Hey, I have 2 bathrooms. I need to have,
right there. Well, I work for a company.
Oh, okay.
And he's a really good friend of mine. I was his first employee.
Awesome.
He did the same thing I did. I sold and I worked. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
You can't do both.
Yeah,
so now he took over selling and I took over installing. And so it works out well that way. So.
Understood. So I'm here sanding. I'm here sanding doors. And
oh yeah.
Well,
it's like working from home is terrible because you go, let's take a break.
Yes, exactly. So. My wife's like, you got till March to get everything done. I'm like, you put on time. I said, well, I got to get everything out of here. We bought over here.
And if it's March, you're not getting much of the outside done.
Exactly.
Exactly right. Inside will get done, then the outside.
Right.
It's a 2-story too. That's right. I did see that.
Yeah, it's a 2-story.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so, yeah.
All right, well, let me get your money, and then we'll figure out what's the best way for him to...
Yeah, we'll stack it. I think I can get both couch pieces.
Do you mind? I'm just wondering how we want to move the truck so that...
if you want to back up on the grass, you don't have to go that far.
You're okay with that?
I'm perfectly okay with that.
Great.
It's just I have to get everything done around. So, yeah, it's not gonna, it'll be easier. Yeah, it'll be easier. You can bike right up to the front door if you like. It'll be easier to get it on. Let me take this down. All right, y'all bear with me, family. I got some folks. This is what get that redone. So let me work this out, family. Y'all hang with me for a second. And I'll be with you. And let's see here. I think we're good right here. All right. All right, let's get this thing started back. Here we go. All right. Again, as we see, our 4 pillars of emotional intelligence, dealing with self-awareness, number 1, right? So we're going to deal with that. So if we go to self-awareness, Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5, deals with self-awareness. And these are the words of Yeshua, right? Or Yahushua. He says, judge not, that ye be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I'm going to stop right there for a second. We see this oftentimes happen to a lot of these social media folks out here. These gossip magazines, these guys, always in the media tearing folks down. We've even seen that in this quote unquote conscious, I say unconscious community. We've even seen this where you got folks just going back and forth, tearing each other down. Right? Just tearing each other down. And because, hold on. And because people have itching, right? They flock to these things as if these things are somehow entertaining, but they don't understand it. Then they take what they hear, not what they know. They take what they hear and they begin to pronounce judgment upon people simply because of what they heard someone else say. Now, listen, I don't know much about T.D. Jakes versus what most other folks know of him. And I'm not saying whether or not he's guilty or innocent of any of these recent allegations between him and Sean Combs. Folks are simply looking to destroy anyone they can get their hands on. They don't care if they're preachers. They don't care if they're school teachers. They don't care if they're police officers. They don't care if it's you and I simply walking down the street. Folks have this unnatural palate to see folks fall. Now, listen, where you're guilty, you're guilty. And the Most High will expose you. What's done in the dark will come to light. But judgment comes from the Most High says when these people are being brought down, we're not even as believers, we're not even allowed to get in the cheering. We're not even allowed to clap and cheer on the destruction of the evildoer. Why? Least the same thing befall you. That's according to scripture. So we have to be very careful, right, in how we do this. Now, let me say this. Folks often say, only God can judge me, right? That's not scriptural either. That's not scriptural either. Your government can judge you, right or wrong, right? Your parents can pass judgment. Your children can pass judgment. Folks pass judgment on you. The thing is it being done maliciously? See, everything is about the thoughts, your consciousness, the thoughts and the intents of the heart. That is what the Most High judges. And that is the criteria we use on how we judge people. But we should judge them according to righteousness, not according to our strictly based on emotions. This is why having emotional intelligence and self-awareness is very important, right? Which is our first pillar, self-awareness. This is why this is very important. In the scripture here in Matthew chapter 7 is very important because it deals with how you see yourself, right? How you see yourself. Let me show you something else. Y'all bear with me. Y'all bear with me. I got contractors in my house. Bear with me. Let's see here. let's deal with this again. And it says, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Listen, that's a part of self-awareness. That's you getting in the mirror. Michael Jackson wrote a song years ago. He says, I'm talking to the man in the mirror. Growing up, we could say, look, you can point your finger at me, but look, you got 3 fingers pointing right back at yourself. Right? My grandfather years ago used to listen to a song before he passed away. He used to listen to a song, sweep around your own front door before you try to sweep around mine. Some of us are just so enthralled and necessary and involved in what the other person is doing, so much so that we forget that we're just as frail and susceptible to failure as anyone else. This is why the scripture tells us our righteousness is as filthy rags. I'm not better than anyone else in this chat, anyone else that's listening to me. I'm not. And we have to stop putting spiritual leaders on that pedestal. This is why people fail, because they begin to idolize these men and women, because these men and women attempt to elevate themselves above the human frailty. We are men. Listen, we have faults and frailties just like anyone else. But the minds of the people oftentimes expect people to walk in a straight line, in a line of perfection, and they leave no room for fail. They leave no room for the human experience. Right? So these things are often dealt with in a way where we are often judgmental of one another, when we really have no rights to be, outside of how it tells us in scripture. Sin is sin, right? Sin is the consequence of being separated from the Most High. Those things people judge themselves, right? Hold on a second, family. All right, testing, test 1. I think we're back. We're good. We're good. I appreciate those of you who stay with us. I appreciate that. Have to get this thing settled. I think folks are trying to get ready for this football game they got coming up this evening. But we're going to get started again. Let me get my presentation back up on the screen. Thank you those who've come in the building. Salaya bin Yah. I am Manna. I see you, sis. I see you in the building. Thank you. Appreciate you as well. Let's start this presentation. Let's get this back up on the screen. Let's get this presentation back up on the screen. All right. Again, so we're talking about one of the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence. We're talking about self-awareness, right? Recognize your own emotions, understand how they influence your actions, right? And then we're going to take this, right? Because this is the secular world's listing, right? what they call the 4 pillars, right? What they talked about earlier, as you go back and watch the early part of the video before our brief intermission, where they talk about how they came to this discovery of emotional intelligence and sort of how they refine emotional intelligence and then began to quantify it with EQ, emotional as your emotional quotient. But how they did this in the 90s, but how, as we clearly see here in the book of Matthew, Yahushua addresses this directly, talking about emotional intelligence in the realm of self-awareness. Matthew 7, verses 1 through 5. Again, I'm going to reread it. Judge not that you may not be judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use it, you will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but not notice the log that is in your own eye? That is a direct challenge to you understanding or being self-aware. In other words, he's saying, are you self-aware of your own frailties? Are you self-aware of where you fail versus to always being easy to find it in someone else? Husbands, realize this with your wives. I had to learn this as well. Wives, realize this with your husbands. Mothers, realize this with your sons. Fathers, realize this with your daughters, right? Why is it so easy for you to see the speck in your brother's eye, but not notice the log that is in your own eye? You don't see how you change the atmosphere in a room, and not always for the good. It's peaceful at home until you walk in the door. Why? Because you haven't dealt with the issues of your day. Maybe your boss got on your nerves, right? Maybe someone cut you off in traffic, right? Maybe you're not feeling well that day. So you come into a room, you come into the household where there's peace, and you become the disruptor. If you're not self-aware, you become the disruptor. And it's everyone else's fault but yours. It's easy for us to see the speck in someone else's eye than see the log in our own eye, right? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye? In other words, how can you say to my brother, you know what, you need therapy, but you don't need therapy? You need to see a doctor, but you don't need to see a doctor. You need help, but you don't need help. We're so quick to psychoanalyze someone else's issues. But Yahushua, Jesus the Christ, says, look, what about your issues? What are you doing about your own issues? Are you self-aware? Where does your emotional intelligence speak to you understanding, or you've been able to recognize or being self-aware about the issues that you have in your own life, right? It's easy for us to fall into that trap. It's easy for us to do that. So how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when there is a log in your own eye? And listen to what he says. He says, you hypocrite. You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye. Then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. In other words, unless you're self-aware, you're not really capable or able to make anyone else self-aware of their issues until you first become self-aware. See, the work that we have to do in 2024, in order to increase our emotional intelligence, in order to raise our emotional quotient, is that we first must do the work on ourselves. That's the challenge for 2024. working on that log that's in my eye. I guarantee you, if you start on that task for 2024, working on the log that is in our own eyes, rather than the speck that is in someone else's eyes, we'll get a lot more accomplished. We'll be a lot less stressed. We'll be a lot more focused. Why? Because we'll be able to see clearer the things and the tasks that we need to do. There is a thing that we mostly find among men, right? Always wanting somebody to do what we say do. Men, we have that bad. Always wanting somebody to get it right the way you say get it right. Not allowing anyone else to give you their understanding and their way of doing things that works just as well as you. But because men, our emotional quotient and our emotional intelligence is so low, we are afraid of another man calling you a simp or a wimp. Man, don't you got your girl in check? I run my house. They do what I say do. You show me a man that lives in that space. Listen, I had to challenge myself with that for years. Listen, if you show me a man that's living in that space, I'll show you a man who's on a low level frequency of emotional intelligence. He's testing very low, almost 0 to none on the scale of emotional intelligence. Ladies, if you've been dealing with a man for years and you think it's a staple of his manhood because you've never seen him cry, I suggest that you reevaluate the way that you see that situation. Because if you have a man with you who doesn't have the ability to cry because his emotional quotient and level is so low, when it comes time for you to be supported emotionally, he won't be there. He can't do it. And you'll get frustrated with him because you'll need his emotional support and he doesn't give it. Then you feel some type of a way. But he's never showed you any emotion. So when your father dies or your mother dies or you lose a friend or you become ill and sick and you need emotional support and you can't understand why he's not there for you, because his emotional quotient, his emotional intelligence level is 0 to none. It hasn't been cultivated. And if you're in a situation like that, ladies, you have to find a way to allow that man to become vulnerable with you emotionally so that you can help him cultivate his emotional intelligence, grow in his emotional quotient. If you're not doing that and you find yourself in that space, I guarantee you, your relationship has a long way to go. And therefore, you'll always find yourself travailing in that relationship. Why? Because your emotional quotient and level is high. His emotional level quotient is very low. And you're just as smart as he is on paper, if not smarter. But you can't put your finger on that thing that just can't seem to get you guys over the hump. Usually it's his emotional responses to things. They're almost 0 to none. And if you're not there or understanding how you can help him cultivate that, right, you'll always find something missing, something wanting in that relationship. So you have to be very clear and understand how these things work in relationships. It's very important to have self-awareness before you enter into a relationship, because if you enter into a relationship and you're not fully self-aware, meaning you still have a log in your eye from your past traumas that you have not dealt with, and you bring that into a relationship, the moment someone begins to tug at that log because they see it, the moment somebody begins to tug at that log that is in your eye, you know what happens? It hurts. You get emotional. You get emotional. This goes for both men and women, but you get emotional. Why? Because you've been walking around blinded in one eye or both eyes because you haven't removed those logs of emotional trauma that, watch this, if you get so many of them, you have so many traumas, so many hurts, disappointments, feelings of loss. Sorry about that, family. That's me. No sound. Sound went out. Thank you, sis. I see it. You've been scarred so much by situations that have gone on in your life that you've built up walls with those laws. And walls are done to perform two tasks. And that's either to keep something in or to keep something out. And you usually, those walls are built up to keep in all of the emotions to hide, for you to hide behind. Or it's to keep out the people that are closest to you, to keep out friends that sincerely have your best interest at heart. Or you find yourself completely blinded. You can't see any wrong that you do. And so you walk into a relationship thinking you're perfect, thinking you're perfect. And that husband or that wife has to now meet your standards because you're the prize, you're the holy grail in the relationship. If you don't deal with those logs of emotional trauma in your life, those things will come back to haunt you in your relationships. Let's move on. Self-regulation. They say self-regulation, but I also like to say self-correction. Right? Not just self-regulation, but self-correction. Right? Let's deal with that. Self-correction says it's the ability to manage one's emotions in a healthy way, adapt to changing circumstances, right? Self-regulation, manage emotions in a healthy way, right? Adopt. Hold on one second, family. I got a lot going on. Okay, family. My apologies. I didn't know I was gonna have so much company here today. But anyway. Let's see here. I ain't on no better. I say, Most High, you want me to get this? Not the Most High. Like time want me to get this lesson out today. Good. All right. I think people just figure I'm home. All right. Let's do this. All right. So again, self-regulation, managing one's emotions in a healthy way, adapt to changing circumstances, right? Self-regulation. Let's look at that, right? We'll show you why these folks just didn't find this in the 90s, where this has always been available to us in the scripture, right? We're going to read Hebrews 12 and 11, right? A couple of more scriptures to show that it deals with self-regulation. For Hebrews 12 and 11 says, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Let me read that again. That's one of the most powerful verses in the New Testament scripture, Hebrews 12 and 11. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. That's dealing with self-regulation and self-correction. Discipline. It's painful rather than pleasant, but it yields peaceful fruit. Discipline brings great harvest, peaceful harvest of fruit and righteousness. If you're endeavoring to something, whether it's your business or whether you're writing a book or whether you're doing anything to increase your wealth or anything like that, you first must have discipline. You're trying to lose weight for the beginning of the year, 2024. You're trying to gain weight. You're trying to be healthier. These things require discipline. And listen, they often talk about no pain, no gain. Here's the scripture right here, Hebrews 12 and 11. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. 2 Timothy 1 and 7, we're talking about self-regulation, the four pillars, one of the four pillars of emotional intelligence. 2 Timothy 1 and 7, for God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. One of the interpretations of translation says, in the King James Version, it says sound mind. But in the context, what it's talking about is self-control, being sober, having control over your faculties, right? That's 2 Timothy 1 and 7. For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. Talking about self-regulation or self-correctness. Proverbs 15:32, it says, whoever ignores instruction despises himself, but he who listens to reproof gains intelligence. Gains intelligence. Listen, if you a know-it-all, your emotional intelligence or your IQ level is low. You need to increase that. You should be forever learning. We should be forever learning, seeking wisdom and knowledge of the Most High Yah, continuing your education, whether it's in a skill, whether you're taking a college course. Reproof increases your intelligence. Increases your intelligence. And we have to be aware of that at all times. We have to be aware of that at all times, right? And the secular world has said, look, we've identified these four pillars, but I'm telling you folks, this is why the Bible is relevant today. It is good for rebuke, reproof, and learning. It's relevant today. Folks want to take you and they want to spend 10, 15, 20 hours arguing with you about whether or not Jesus walked on water. To both you and myself, whether or not Jesus walked on water is not the words I'm going to say when I need these contractors to give me the price that I need for them to give to me. It's not what's going to get you the job in the long run for both you and I, believer or non-believer. But what will help me when it comes to the story of when Jesus walked on water is not so much as Jesus walked on water, but it's more so that unlike Peter, who also walked on water in that moment, that I don't become distracted by the things that are going on around me that are seemingly unfavorable or things that are known to destroy or to kill me, that those things don't take me off the focus of doing something extraordinary as it did Peter, as Peter stepped out of the boat and began to walk on water. In that extraordinary moment, an act of courage and faith, he began to pay more attention to what was going on around him, the tempest of the sea that began to occur around him, and he began to lose focus on being great or as great as Yeshua himself in that moment as he began to walk on water. So if I take that understanding and that principle, that no matter what goes on around me, whatever circumstances or whatever thing comes up against me, I can still do the extraordinary if I stay focused. You understand? That's how the story of Jesus walking on water becomes relevant in my life and relevant in yours. Right? So these are the scriptures that deal with self-regulation and self-correction. These things has always existed through our laws and the prophet under the inspiration from the Most High Yah, giving us the tools to do what? Subdue the earth. To conquer the world, to complete the task at hand. Number 3, empathy. Let's deal with that. Right? Empathy. Understand other people's emotions. Offer comfort and support. Care about somebody besides yourself all the time. It's quite okay to do that. Empathy. In our community, one of the biggest issues that we have is that we're so empathetic towards one another. Right? We're so empathetic towards one another. Right? Just to be able to do what you can for someone who's in a less favorable position than you. You may not have much to give. You may not have money. You may not have food to give. But it takes nothing at all to share a kind word. Nothing at all to say, you know what? I don't have any money to give. I don't have any food to give you. But I can say, you can make it. It costs me nothing but a few moments of my time to pray for you, it costs nothing for me to simply say, good morning, glad to see you. Sometimes that's all folks need, is to be acknowledged in the world. That's all that they need. That's it. It's not always about how much money you give and how much you have to give, right? But look at what the book says about empathy, right? Which is what the world claims that this is one of their 4 pillars of emotional intelligence that they didn't discover, and really quantify until the 1990s. But look at what the scripture says over 1,000 years ago. It says, Romans 15:1, it says, we who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. It's just selfish. It's not being selfish. It says we have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak. Some translations say bearing the infirmities of the weak. Those of us who are strong, you may not be strong financially, you may not be strong elsewhere else, but you know what? You are strong at heart, you're strong at mind, you're strong in spirit. And you have an obligation to your fellow man to bear with them their infirmities and not to please ourselves. 1 Corinthians 12:25-26, it says that there may be no division in the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. That's a principle our community can build off of for a lifetime. That's an African proverb. It takes a village. That's what Paul is saying here to the letter to the church of Corinth. He says, if one member suffers, we all suffer together. If one member is honored, we all rejoice. Some folks can't be happy for nobody, let alone themselves. Right? 1 John 3:17, it says, but if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love or Yah's love abide in him? How can you say you have the love of the Most High, but you see a brother in need? And it says here, you close your heart against him. In other words, you have no compassion. How can you say the Most High dwells within you, or the Spirit of the Most High is within you, or upon you, or around you, or flows through you, and you got to know it, but you have no compassion, no empathy for your fellow man? How can you say you love God whom you've never seen? But hate your brother whom you see every day? Something's not right there. And this is what our people need, our community need. I'm not saying, listen, I'm not saying for every fundraiser that every time Dick and Harry decide they want to raise something for the Poodle Nation, or they want to raise something to save the hibiscus or whatever. They always want to save something, but I walk right past the young woman and her child sitting on the streets and won't buy them a Subway sandwich. I'll never forget years ago in Chicago, and I hope the family is doing well. I saw a young lady, had a young child, young girl with her, sitting on the side of the office building that I was coming out of. And she said, I'm hungry. The mother, the little girl did, right? She said, I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Can we go in the store? Can I have a cookie? And I said, well, look, I'm trying to get something so we can go stay at the shelter. Now, mind you, could it be a scam? It could have been. Could it have been somebody trying to set you up for something? It could have been. But I'm a firm believer that if you have the Spirit of the Most High within you, that will definitely give you the wisdom and knowledge and understanding, or the wisdom to understand how to handle that situation. But what I did was I said, you know what? And I didn't feel led at that point or understood to give that person money at the time. But I said, well, look, because I do, I give money. If I got a few dollars in my pocket, I will give. People, I do that. And what they do with it, and people don't, I don't give money. I don't give people, strangers, money on it because all they're going to do is take it and drink it up. That's not the purpose of giving. The purpose of you giving is the fact that you show compassion and that you gave. Now, what they do with it, yeah, your hard-earned dollar, what they do with it is on them, because I understand that my reward in my sowing will get greater than any dollar or anything they could have scammed me out of, because I sowed it out of the kindness of my heart. So I just took the young girl in there and I told, she can buy her a sandwich, and, and mom, you get you a sandwich too. And, mom, she said, well, let's just order one sandwich because, I don't want to take all your money. Both of y'all get y'all some sandwiches. So I just bought them like a bunch of sandwiches from the Subway. And that's what they wanted, a bunch of things to drink. Now, she couldn't carry all the stuff around with her, but the child was grateful, right? If nothing else, I just wanted to make sure the child has something to eat. And the mother too, since that's her protector. See, oftentimes we miss out on sowing in people who are in need because we're so worried about whether or not they're going to turn, as soon as we turn our head, if they're going to do a 180 or 360 and run up in the liquor store somewhere. Or if they're going to take, my few dollars and put it with their dollars, and now they probably got more money in their pocket than I do in mine. That's not the purpose of giving. It's not the purpose of giving. About what is the other person going to do with it on the side? Are they going to do right by it? That's not the purpose of giving. It's not the purpose of giving, right? So again, we've gone through self-awareness. We've gone through self-regulation. We've gone through empathy. Now we're going to be coming up. We're going to talk about now social skills. as one of the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence. And this is what the secular world gives us, right? The psychologists, the psychoanalysts, right? These are the 4 pillars that they talk about emotional intelligence. But what we're doing is showing that in the scripture, this wisdom has always been. Not since their development and their study that they brought about in the 90s, talking about, emotional intelligence. No, these things have always been taught in scripture. Why? Because the Most High knows what we are in need of before we even need it. He knows the spirit of wisdom, right? So number 4, we're going to be talking about social skills. Social skills, right? Is one of the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence. Social skills, build and maintain relationships. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but we're going to talk about it this way, a little bit differently. Social skills, build and maintain relationships, effective communication. Effective communication. Right? The scripture talks about evil communication corrupts good manners. That's not effective communication. Right? But what does the scripture say about social skills? Right? Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 18 says, he executes justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Right? It says to build and maintain relationships. How do you do that? Justice, right? Bringing peace and harmony to a situation. For the fatherless, that is the orphan, and the widow. See, during that particular time, that if there was a widow and an orphan, saying the father may have passed on or passed away or left the home, and you had a mother who was a widow, who had children, now the children are now orphans or fathers, they had a very difficult time in most societies being able to survive, to eat properly, not fall prey to sickness and disease and health issues. Why? Because they couldn't afford the medical care at the time. More things change, the more they stay the same, huh? There's nothing new under the sun. But justice for the orphan and the widow, even back then, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, even back then, the Most High charges Israel, charges the nation to have compassion on the fatherless. Today in our society, there's no compassion for the fatherless. There's no compassion. They've just been thrown to the wolves. They've been devalued in our society, our young people today. Right? He says he loves the widow. Single mothers, the Most High has always remembered you. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 18. He says he executes justice for the widow. He hasn't forgotten. See, it's our society who has made single motherhood a stigma. Now, I'm not saying it should be practiced to the degree where it becomes the norm, the thought process of the mind, right? But in situations and circumstances where things occur, and they're usually out of the realm and the scope of the young lady. I've met very few young women in my life who just up and one day decided to be a single mom. Very few. But we are not to look down and to discourage them. We are to uphold them and look and say, listen, whatever situation you find yourself in today, the Most High has always had you on his mind. And you take them to this verse, Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 18. This ain't in the New Testament. This is from the time of old. He has always thought about you. And he says he even loves the sojourner. Now, when I ask some of you folks, who is the sojourner? Would the sojourners been Israelites? I don't think so. I don't think so. But it says giving him food and clothing. Have some compassion. Right? Let's go to this next verse. We're talking about social skills, build and maintain relationships, effective communication. Proverbs 18:24 says, and a man that hath friends must show himself friendly. And there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. Let me say this. This is the understanding and the wisdom scripture you use that answers the fallacious argument whether or not Jonathan, the son of Saul, and King David, or David at the time, were in some type of illicit or homosexual type relationship because of the way that the English translation gives the scripture, right? It talks about when David does the eulogy for Jonathan, he talks about how he was closer to him than the love of a woman, right? And people often try to use that. And it says that David and Jonathan kissed each other. They greeted each other, right? And people try to use that as some type of debate or argument as to whether or not this is giving homosexual innuendos. And we can go through that and clearly break that down and show it's not such. When it talks about that their souls was knit together, it talks about that just simply means that they made a pact, an unbreakable bond, an unbreakable pact that they had made, right? But this is the context of the understanding of that in Proverbs chapter 18, verses 24. It says, a man that hath friends must show himself friendly. And there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother, right? It's closer to you than family. Closer to you than anyone that you grew up with in your whole household at times. David says in the book of Psalms, he says, it was not my enemies that reproached me, for then I could have borne it. He says, neither was that he hated me, though they magnify himself against me. He said, but then I could have hid myself from them. He said, but it was you, my brother. It was you that talked about me behind my back. The one we shared every experience with growing up as a child. We played ball together. We went to the same schools, and my sister, we shared even some of the same clothes growing up. Your mom did your hair and my hair. Right? Those types of situations. Right? David said it was you who betrayed me. Right? But Proverbs 18:21 goes directly to that understanding. A man that has friends or a woman that has friends must show him or herself friendly. My uncle used to say, show yourself friendly and you will have friends. But some folks, some of y'all just ain't approachable. Ladies, you don't have to smile every time a man gives you a compliment, but you should smile sometimes. Everybody shooting a shot can't be missing. They can't be missing. Right? Check your game plan, ladies. Check your X's and O's. Show yourself friendly and you will have friends. Right? Effective communication. Right? Scripture talks about evil communication corrupts good manners. Watch what you say. And more importantly, watch who you say it to. Watch who you say it to. Some folks can't wait to get on the phone after they hang up from you and go back and tell, girl, you know what so-and-so said? Hey, bro, I ain't like that. I ain't really like that. Hey, but I'm just going to put you up on game. I'm going to tell you, dude, the snake. Like you ain't gossiping, dude. You still gossiping? You still gossiping, brother? I tell folks all the time, listen, hey, if you're not trying to tell me or call me and tell me about somebody else about how, we can help build together or we can help create something together, how we can help move forward together. I don't have time and I'm not making time. My time is more valuable than listening to your gossip. Right? There's plenty of outlets on social media and television and streaming. If I just want to hear folks talk about each other all day, it's enough reunion shows out here. You get all the gossip and foolishness you want. I don't need you calling me on the phone. Be careful. We got to really be careful, right, about that. Let's keep going. Now we dealt with the four pillars of emotional intelligence, the foundation of emotional intelligence. We just really dealt with that. So let's continue. EI, or emotional intelligence, right, is the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and actions. Spirituality is the basic feeling of being connected with one's complete self, others, and the universe. And this is what I said earlier, and we're going to be getting into our next lecture in this series as we go throughout the year, is going to be dealing with spiritual intelligence, right? But this is what we talked about and touched on earlier, that your spirituality is the basic feeling of being connected with one's complete self, others, and the entire universe, right? In understanding that, right, we clearly see that your spiritual foundation must precede or is really the basis for your emotional intelligence, or how to quantify your emotional quotient, right? It's your spiritual connection to self, others, and the entire universe. And that includes the Most High Yah. When I'm talking about the entire universe, the creator, all of that. Now, I want you guys to look at something. If you don't really get anything else, right? I want you guys to really pay attention to this particular slide here. Hopefully I'm still showing it. Let me see here. Make sure you guys can see it, because this is a very important slide. I want everybody to see. Okay, it looks like it's still presenting. All right. Let's see here. Let me see. Let me see if the screen shows. Put a 1 in the chat if you guys can see my screen. Let me know if this slide changes. I'm gonna present it again. Fantastic. Let me go back and make sure you can see here. Oh, fantastic. Hit that like button. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. All right. This slide here, I want to ask a question here based on this diagram here. It talks about the secular world places the SQ, or the spiritual quotient, at the least needed for survival. Why is it that they do that? Great question, Sister Cassandra. Let me get that, because that is important. Let me get that. Hold on. Let me get that. 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 I want to show you guys. Hold on, I want to get you that slide. Hold on 1 second. I want to get you this source for that slide, for that diagram. I want to get you the source of that diagram. See if I I'll find that for you. That's a great question. That's why I appreciate you guys in the chat. You guys, like Sister Cassandra. So I would like for you guys to read that article. I would like for you guys to really read that article. Let me see if I see it really quickly. If not, I'm going to go through it. I'm going to go through this lesson, then I'm going to come back to it, and then we'll look for that. Because I definitely want you guys to use that. You may be able to find it on your own here. If you type in HHRDM, Holistic Human Resources Development Model. If you type in hold on, let me go back. If you type in Holistic Human Resource Development Model, if you type that in, Sister Cassandra, you should be able to find their understanding on that. You should be able to find it. You should be able to find that one. I'm gonna put the link of it in the chat when I look up Holistic Human Resource Development Model. HHRDM is what they call it. You should be able to find it. But what I wanted to do was show you how they diagram this out. And you see what they do in the secular world. You see they began, the highest level quotient is intelligence quotient, right? Skill, knowledge, ability, rational, logical, what they claim which separates us from the animals to a degree, right? You have the intelligent quotient. Then you have the emotional quotient. But last but not least, in my opinion, you have the spiritual quotient. Now, bookended on both sides of the emotional, of the IQ, your EQ, and your SQ, they have human intelligence on one side, and then they have the holistic human resource development model on the other side. Now, why is it that the secular world places the spiritual quotient at the least needed for survival? Why? Why do they do that? Right? So in the spiritual quotient here, you see, it talks about wisdom, sense of meaning, sense of community, self-awareness, humanization, compassion, connectedness. That's the spiritual quotient. I wonder that if in their model, which I believe is flawed here, because I believe the spiritual quotient must first come before the intellectual quotient and clearly before the emotional quotient. Because the spiritual quotient that they have even listed here talks about first what? Wisdom. Wisdom over skill and wisdom over controlling one's emotions. Wisdom, as the scripture says, is the principal thing, not your skills and not the ability to control your emotions. But wisdom is the principal thing. And because wisdom is the principal thing, that should be the first thing cultivated, right? The scripture says, he who lacks wisdom, when what? First acts of Yah. Because it's within that spiritual quotient, which I think we need to cultivate. We talked about this earlier, our young girls and young boys early on in different stages of life, these certain intelligences are more often paid more attention to, simply based on a gender, right? Young girls are usually built up early on in life to be more emotionally intelligent than most men. Men are usually raised to be more intellectually quotient. And when I say that, I'm talking about the inability to problem solve, but without having compassion. And to be honest, I think that's actually, if you were aware of any one of Hillary Clinton's campaign when she was first running for president, right? They did this commercial on who would you want answering that red phone. So, like in the White House, right? They have this red phone for emergencies, right? And if you pick up this red phone rings, then it's a nuclear threat. And then you have to give these codes, whether or not, you're going to want, a foreign country or an enemy to be responded to by the United States by using physical nuclear power, nuclear force. So this red phone rings to the president's office, and so the commercial basically says, "Well, who would you like to have answering your phone at 4 a.m. when a crisis breaks out?" Right? Um, and the whole understanding of that article and why it was so effective in working against Hillary Clinton was because people weren't aware or had no understanding of her emotional intelligence or her EQ. So basically, they made the argument of, we're saying her EQ or her emotional quotient intelligence level is so low that if somebody rings and she picks up their red phone, she's going to give somebody the okay to go do this and go do that without ever thinking about what it is that makes the difference between men and women when it comes to emotional intelligence, right? So basically, they were saying her emotional intelligence level is low, right? She's quick to the draw. She has very little compassion, right? And it was effective. That one commercial, it was effective on having Hillary Clinton not being able to. Thank you, Sister Cassandra. ResearchGate.net, holistic human resource development model. Thank you, Sister Miss. I appreciate that. ResearchGate, absolutely. And showing her inability and not being able to have this balance, right, between her emotions and intelligence, right? But why is it on this chart that they place spiritual quotient at the bottom? When we just went through scripture after scripture after scripture that preceded their 1990 model of emotional intelligence. Why is it that they put the spiritual quotient at the very least of this? Right? Because they don't want you, the secular world, doesn't think that spiritual quotient or the SQ can really be tested. You can't quantify it. You can't falsify it. The spiritual quotient is something that is, is really make believe. It's something that you really can't gauge. I won't say make believe, but something that you can't gauge. You can't test for it. You can't theorize it. So they place it at the bottom when it really should be placed at the top. But simply because they can't develop a theory for it, right? They can't or a working hypothesis for it. They know that it exists, and they know it plays a role, and that it has influence of both the emotional intelligence and both the emotional intelligence. They know the spiritual intelligence, the spiritual quotient is so powerful, but simply because they can't use their tools or their hypothesis and their theories to explain away God, then they place this at the bottom of this chart. That's why I believe you see it there. That's why I believe you see it there. They can't use their hypothesis and their understanding, their humanism, to dismiss the power of the Most High Yah. She said, because they are the kingdom of Satan. Absolutely. They are in the kingdom of Satan. They are adversary to the things of the Most High. Absolutely. 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 And so we have to keep in mind that when we're looking at a lot of these studies, these PhD scholars, these psychoanalysts and different things like that, they're gleaning, and we just saw, they're really gleaning from the scripture. They're gleaning from the teachings of the law and the prophets. They're gleaning from Yeshua, Yahushua, Jesus the Christ. They're gleaning from the book. But they try to play it down that it's insignificant to the scheme of human survival and understanding and being a holistic. Because they can't take credit for the things of the Most High. They can't take credit for God's wisdom. All right. So we have to be very careful when we're looking at these studies and understand really what's going on here, right? So this is what we have to understand, and we're talking about increasing and growing and elevating our consciousness, building our emotional intelligence, our emotional quotient for the beginning of the year. Because if we don't get this piece right now, if we don't build a foundation of what we need to do and what you want to accomplish and achieve in your life moving forward this year, if you don't get this right now, everything that you'll do as you begin to build, you'll be building on sinking sand. Why? Because your foundation won't be set. And it's not so much as that we need to get our emotions out of the way, but we need to know how to handle them. But it begins with our spiritual intelligence, the spirit of wisdom from the Most High, a sense of meaning, sense of community, self-awareness, humanization, compassion, and connectedness. And we're going to do a full lecture and full study on spiritual intelligence. Right? But let's get to it. There's an intriguing new study which reveals positive emotions follow a classic psychophysical law. Let's read that. Let's read that. All right. I should be sharing my screen on that. And this is an article from Side Post, right? Intriguing new study reveals positive emotions. Hold on. Follow a classical psychophysical law, right? So let's read a little bit of that. Let's read a little bit of that. It says a study has found evidence that some emotional responses adhere to what is called Weber's law. Weber's law. It's very interesting. I want y'all to take notes on that and just read the study even more in depth for yourself. It's called Weber's law, right? A psychophysiological principle that governs human perception of various sensations. In experiments where participants assessed emotional intensity, it was found that as the level of pleasantness increased, the accuracy of their judgments diminished. The study was published in Emotion magazine. Weber's law, also known as the Weber-Fechner law, is a fundamental principle in psychology and psychophysics that describes the relationship between the intensity of a physical stimulus and the perceived magnitude of the sensation it produces. It states that the smallest detectable change in the intensity of a stimulus is proportional to the initial intensity of the stimulus. As the intensity of a stimulus increases, the amount of change required for a person to notice the difference also increases, right? In other words, when people experience levels of euphoria, where they're excited about a relationship, where they're excited about an event that is occurring or has occurred, or they're excited about something has drawn them to a place of euphoria where they seem to be in a place of being ecstatic, and in a place that is stimulating all of their senses. What they're saying is, when that ends, when that comes to an end, when that moment or whatever is occurring at the time, when that thing ends, the unpleasantness of it ending is just as powerful and intense as the initial state of euphoria, right? And even the slight change in it. This is why when people are caught up in relationships where it's only all about how it makes me feel as a person or how it makes them feel, that's the only thing that's having them at this level, and they do everything to maintain and want to stay at this level. They expect everything to always be hunky-dory. It always needs to be rose petals. It always needs to be dandelions and sunflowers and tulips throughout the entire relationship. That thing that made you feel this way or that way about this person, or this way or that way about this thing, that they always want to feel that euphoric state that makes them happy or pleasurable. But the moment that intensity subsides, of pleasure subsides, the feeling of loss of it, or that it's gone away, is even just as intense of the initial euphoric status you have when that thing was just new to you, brand new to you. He was just brand new to you. She was just brand new to you. Because why? It's only based on the emotion, on how it makes you feel. Right? And so we have to be very careful about that. We have to be very careful about that. That when you're simply focusing on how a relationship or how something makes you feel, without you first what? Having empathy or compassion or self-awareness or self-correction, being able to communicate, being able to show compassion and give towards others. When you enter a relationship looking to only for what you can get out of it instead of what you can give, the moment you don't get what you want out of that relationship, it is just as painful and hurt and destructive to your psyche as it is as you in the relationship initially getting everything you think you want out of it. You must go into it giving. The stimulus increases, is what they're saying. The intensity of this stimulus is increasing just as the same as it does when you first enter in something that gives you that feeling, euphoric state of pleasure. You have to be able to balance out your emotions. You can't just be all one everything. Don't put all your emotional eggs into one basket. Don't do that. I know people say, you know what? This is my life partner. This is the person I'm marrying. Don't listen. 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 Don't put all your emotional eggs into the hands of someone else. And the reason why you don't do that, just naturally speaking, right? How many of us right now has the arms, the strength, the wherewithal, the delicacy, hands big enough to hold a dozen of eggs? Not in a carton. Not in a carton, just in your hands alone and in your arms alone. You can just hold a dozen eggs. I guarantee you it's very difficult to do. You're going to drop one. So when you enter a relationship and you put all of your emotional eggs in someone else's hands and their arms, what do they do with their own emotional eggs, their own emotions? Where do they put, whose basket do they put them in? Do they put them in yours? Well, you just put all yours into their emotional basket. Clearly, you're not looking them to fill your basket back up with their emotional eggs. Putting all your eggs in their basket, something's going to drop. Something's going to break. Right? This is why the scripture teaches us what? Cast your cares on him. Who? On the Most High Yah. Why? Because he knows what you are in need of. And guess what? He has the arms and the strength and the hands and the wisdom to hold all of your emotional eggs. He can handle your emotional baggage. It's in his word. Cast all your cares on him. Don't put people that you say you care about in a position to hurt you. You say, well, how can I do that, Brother Yarah? By putting all of the weight of your emotional baggage and your emotional issues in their hands. They're not equipped. They're not made for that. This is why we must be self-aware. This is why we must first deal with our own state of emotions, our own emotional intelligence, growing and building our own emotional quotient. Get up in the morning and get in the mirror. Speak life to yourself. Speak healing to yourself. You don't need somebody laying in the bed next to you. You don't need to be on the phone with 20 or 30 people. I get it. You know, it's good to have your prayer warriors and your study groups. All of that stuff is great. But at the end of the day, when you hang up those phones and disconnect those computers and you're standing in that mirror and you're looking at yourself face to face, as Paul talks about in Corinthians, he said, now I see through a glass darkly, but now face to face. When I was a child, I played as a child, but when I got older, I put away childish things. Listen, once you get up in front of that mirror and you deal with that person that's there, that's the only way you could begin, as we read about in Matthew's chapter 7, pulling the log out of your own eye. That is the only way you're able to handle and to deal with that. And don't let anybody tell you that talking to yourself means you got a mental problem. No, that doesn't mean I have a mental problem or I have mental issues. That just means I'm self-aware. That's what you tell them from now on. No, I'm just self-aware. And I'd rather correct me than the Most High correct me, or you try to correct me. Let me self-correct. Even in relationships, sometimes you have to allow the other person to self-correct before you jump down their throat. They might be right there on the cusp of getting this thing. Give them the opportunity to self-correct, whether it's family, friends, co-workers. Allow them the space to self-correct. Because what you need to do in that time, when you're allowing them that space to self-correct, make sure you're not being the hypocrite, as we read about in Matthew chapter 7. Make sure you're on point with who you are and the things that you have to deal with, because you might realize that the problem might just be the person in the mirror. So get that Windex or that vinegar and water, whatever it is you use, clean that mirror off, buff it up, shine it up real good. And in 2024, do the work on yourself. And one of the reasons why it's so important for us to do the work on ourselves, because there is someone out there that needs your help. And you can't help them if all the eggs in your basket are all fractured and cracked. You can't help them. So we were talking about Weber's law, also known as the Weber-Fechner law, a fundamental principle they use in psychology and psychophysics that describes the relationship between the intensity of a physical stimulus and the perceived magnitude of the sensation that it produces. Everything that feels good doesn't mean it's good for you. And everything that feels good to you doesn't mean it's good for you all the time. Unfortunately, some people go into relationships thinking that relationship is supposed to make them feel good all the time. You're sabotaging your own relationship. You're sabotaging your own happiness. You're setting other people up to let you down. Don't do that. Right? So I'm almost wrapping it up here. Let's continue. So that is what we were just reading. The intriguing new study reveals positive emotions follow a classic psychophysical law, the Weber-Fechner law, right? And so you see the source there, Side Post 2023, right? So you guys can read that, study up on that for yourselves. Let's go down to the next slide. Let's see if I want that we talked about Weber's law. Berkovich, PhD student, says, I find it fascinating to take a topic that seems so spiritual, such as our emotions, and yet to be able to quantify it, right? What was he talking about here? Let's talk about it. I wanted to show you another example here of in another article, talks about people high in emotional intelligence. They use the cake baking principle to master their inner world and take charge. They use the cake baking principle, those who have high emotional intelligence. Let's look at what this cake baking principle is. Let's take a look at that, right? And this is a really good article, really entertaining, and really poignant to the lesson and to the lecture today. Let's talk about that. You guys should be able to see that screen there. Okay. Now let's read a little bit of it. People high in emotional intelligence use the cake baking principle to master their inner world and take charge. You can construct your emotional reality like you would bake a cake, right? By Nick Hobson, Managing Director, North African Influence at Work, Behavioral Science Advisor, right? And here it is. This is what they're talking about here. Watch this, people. This is very interesting, right? Cake baking theory, right? It says for centuries, emotions were undervalued, misunderstood, and even demonized by philosophers and theologians. They were seen as obstacles to rational thought, a view that permeated our understanding. And that's usually because it was men writing and philosophizing at those times, and they couldn't understand how to deal with the emotional intelligence of a woman. So they thought something was just wrong with women. Instead of seeing the log in their own eye that they were coming up short themselves because their emotional quotient and emotional intelligence level was low. That's all that is. That's all that is, right? It says here, it says it wasn't until the modern era, right, that psychologists began to unravel the complexities of human emotions. In other words, they began to understand women more, right? Yeah, sometimes you just got to decode these things, these guys, right? To unravel the complexities of human emotions, sparking a revolution in understanding what it means to be emotionally intelligent. And we read earlier along in this that they didn't come about this understanding until the 1960s. And really, what did you have happening in the 1960s, right? They had this movement that they call really began, they called the feminist movement, really began to burgeoning movement in the 1960s. But really what it was is, outside of other things that acculturated it was just more so women saying, listen, there is a thing of emotional intelligence. We got you now on the intellectual quotient, in the IQ, men, brothers. But now y'all lacking because y'all can't even express yourselves. This is why we wind up in war. Because some man who has a low level frequency of emotional intelligence can't handle something, can't handle his emotions. Right? So this is what they're really saying here, right? So let's continue. It says, the pioneering work in effective science, particularly in the latter half of the 20th century, brought forth the discrete emotions theory. This theory, championed by psychologists like Paul Ekman, identifies 6 basic emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, and surprise. Ekman's groundbreaking research on facial expressions provided empirical support for this theory, suggesting that these emotions were universal and could be recognized across different cultures. So no matter what culture you're in, everybody in the entire world acts surprised, regardless if there's a language barrier, custom barrier, no matter where you live, the deepest recesses of the Amazon, no matter where you lived your life, right? Anybody living, human being with a sense of intelligence, they all act surprised. We all have the same look of surprise. We all make the same disgusting face when we taste something that's nasty. We don't like the way it tastes. We all have we celebrate when we're happy. We all smile the same way, regardless of any contact with any other humans in our lives, right? So basically, that was the evidence that he used to support his discrete emotions theory. It is really just the 6 basic emotions. Is it really? However, while this was a significant step forward, it somewhat narrowed our view of the emotional landscape. Emotions, we've come to understand, are far more nuanced and intricate than a set of 6 distinct categories. Recognizing this limitation, a new wave of psychologists, including Lisa Feldman Barrett, began to explore a more dynamic view of emotions. And here's a young lady that says, like, look, I've experienced more than just those 6 emotions in my life. Those can't be it. Right? So again, she comes on and she says, and others in the same constructivist or appraisal-based camp of emotional psychological proposed a radical yet intuitive idea. Emotions are not fixed entities, but they are constructed from a variety of psychological components. To explain this, Barry uses a compelling metaphor, and wouldn't it be a woman who gives us the cake baking rule to understand how you really should look at emotional intelligence and emotional quotient, because men have been writing about this for years, missing the mark, trying to put us back in the box. Y'all just got 6 emotions and that's it. And then here comes this young educated lady. She said, no, listen, I read the same studies. I've mastered the same degrees you have. And I'm telling you right now that you guys have not even clearly tapped in to what emotional intelligence is all about. Right? And it so often happens so much with us in society, especially in male-dominated society, that women have been advanced beyond us in so many levels for so many years. But man, we play catch up and then we take credit once we finally figured it out. So it took some guys to the 1960s to figure it out, what women have been doing and operating in an emotional state of intelligence and quotient since the beginning of time. It took some men to the 1960s to finally get a glimpse of understanding. And then another young lady had to come right behind them after that and say, hey, look, yeah, that's just a glimpse of it. You still are lacking in your understanding. I'm just saying, it is what it is, right? So why seeing emotions in this way matters, this constructiveness approach to emotions has profound implications, especially for those high in emotional intelligence. When we view emotions as discrete, unchangeable categories, we limit our ability to understand and manage them. However, seeing emotions as constructions, as mixtures that we can influence and adjust, empowers us. It suggests that we are not at the mercy of our emotions, but rather can shape and refine them. Emotional intelligence, therefore, is not just about recognizing and labeling emotions accurately. It's about understanding the recipe behind each emotional experience and knowing how to alter the ingredients to create a more desirable outcome. This capability is crucial in personal development, leadership, interpersonal relationships. It allows emotionally intelligent individuals to be more influential, in control, and present in their interactions. The cake baking rule of emotion underscores a vital truth. Our emotional world is malleable, right? That means you can shape it, you can beat it, right? You can beat it into shape, right? Or you can form it, right? Just like malleable is just like somebody who does iron work, right? Or iron sculptures. They can heat that metal up in or iron or copper or whatever, and they can beat it into shape. That's what malleable is. So by measuring the art of mixing and balancing our emotional ingredients, we can craft a more fulfilling and controlled emotional life. This perspective not only enriches our understanding of emotions, but also opens up new avenues for personal growth and effectiveness. And so that's where we need to be, family, right? Understanding what the scripture teaches. Early on, we went through quite a few scriptures that teaches us how to do these same things. But it's not just about feeling bad, feeling sad, but it's how we're able to control it and how we're able to allow it to work for us. These are the things that we need to be working on ourselves, looking in the mirror, challenging ourselves daily, right? Setting goals for ourselves on how to grow our emotional intelligence. I guarantee you, what we're facing in this world today is our emotional intelligence level that is going to be the defining factor of who's going to survive this society as a whole. That's where we are today, family. That's where we are today. And so I just wanted to touch on that. We're going to be talking about uh, spiritual intelligence and why that's important, right? We're going to be dealing with that in the near future. Again, I apologize, you guys. I may take this video down and edit it, all the spaces that I had, the breaks, the interruptions that I had, and put it back up. More than likely, I probably am going to do that and put it back up on the channel, but I will leave it up until I finish doing that first. But I appreciate everyone on the first of the year. I look forward to many more days where we're going to be sharing in this like manner. And let me see here. Be doing that. And again, I just wanted to touch on this lecture series in building our emotional intelligence, strengthening our emotional intelligence, growing our emotional intelligence, right? So, so these are the things that, we need, right? And we can share, and we can build upon, right? So I appreciate you guys for building the building today. Again, Professor Lovely Lady, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for your support throughout last year, and being with us on this year. Sister Cassandra, I can't say enough about you. Thank you for your support, your contribution to the channel, both Sister Professor Lovely Lady and Sister Cassandra. I really appreciate both you guys so very much. Thank you so much. Sister Zion Facts, Sister Zion Facts, I'm glad you're here. I hope you're still listening. Friday, this coming Saturday, I believe it is. If you're available, I'm going to be doing a lesson, a critical look on the book of Esther. I'm going to be talking about Queen Esther. And we talk about Queen Esther. And I'm going to tell you guys why I decided to do this. It's because I heard some people say in the community, quote unquote, supposed to be Bible believers, why the book of Esther or the book of Esther is not relevant to the scripture. How they don't recognize it as God inspired or Yah inspired. And that has to be addressed. Because that clearly tells me you're either a novice in the scripture or you're studying at it from a personal view instead of studying the critical nature and understanding the historicity of it, as well as the message behind it. It is very relevant today. There is a reason why it's in the canon, in the Bible. There's a reason why it has survived. And there is a reason why this lesson must be done. And so we're going to be talking about this Saturday, January the 6th. We're going to be talking about Queen Esther, right? Going to be talking about this. So Zion Facts, if you're available, please, I would love for you guys to come and join the panel. And we can talk about Queen Esther on Friday. My brother Dratio in the building. Thank you as always. I appreciate your support throughout the year, my brother. Very intelligent, knowledgeable brother. Shalom, Sister Vivian. Glad you made it in the building. I appreciate you as well. Thank you for being in the building. No doubt. I saw Ann Manna. It's not the same sister. Is it? Is Vivian, is it? I'm not sure. I don't know if I remember or not. But thank you. So I'm going to be signing off. We've been on. I tried to start about 12:15. So we've been on now for a couple of hours now. So we're going to sign off on this lesson. Again, I appreciate all of you, your support throughout the year. We're going to be looking to do some big things together as we're going forward. There he is. Shalai bin Yah. Peace. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings. But until next time, may the peace of God rule in your hearts. And I am going to say that we all should just keep ascending.